So in 2 Kings chapter 22, we have the story of Josiah, and even into chapter 23. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign. He was pretty young. Very young. 8. Taking the throne of a kingdom. That's pretty young. And, but yet Josiah, in chapter 23, verse 25, it mentions something very interesting about him, something that nobody ever remembers. And I can tell you why. He says, and like unto him there was no king before him that turned to the Lord with all his heart. Now, David was not his man after God's own heart. But this says there's no man that was before Josiah who turned to the Lord with all his heart, according to the law of Moses, as Josiah did. Which means he pursued God even further, even more so than David did. And after Josiah, there was never a king like him. Josiah was one of the greatest kings of the nation of Israel. But he gets overlooked so easily because there's really not, unlike David, there's really not a lot given to him. He's only given a couple chapters. David, he's got pretty much an entire book. Or really 2, because it mentions him before his kingdom. Before David became king. It mentions David and his fights with Saul. And so there's a lot given and attributed to David. But here Josiah, an 8-year-old boy, turns to the Lord even more than David, his grandfather, or great-grandfather, or wherever he's at in the line, his father David. Seeks after the Lord so much more than David does. And after Josiah, there was never anyone as great as he who sought after the Lord according to the law of Moses. Now, I didn't read everything, but back at the end of chapter 21, it gives us a history of Josiah's family. You got Manasseh, who I actually mentioned last week, I preached on him last week. Then you have, that Manasseh is Josiah's grandfather. Then you have his father, Amon. Amon was wicked, and he only reigned 2 years. He was 22 years old when he took the throne of his father Manasseh, but he only reigned 2 years. He was no doubt, he was murdered at the age of 24. And so now his son, Josiah, is given the throne. Now, Josiah didn't have exactly the best circumstances as a kid. He didn't have the best childhood, influence-wise. He's got his father, a very wicked king. So wicked, God kills him in 2 years. Then you have his grandfather who sealed the destruction of Jerusalem. And I won't go into all the details, but chapter 21 deals mainly with Manasseh, but just the wickedness of Manasseh. And this is Josiah's influence in his life to the age of 8. And the first 7 years of a child's life are the most crucial years. Because what gets instilled in them within the first 7 will be ingrained in them the rest of their lives. First 7 years is the first 7 years you have to develop a child. But yet we see that despite his family history, Josiah becomes the greatest king, one of the greatest kings of Israel, despite his childhood. Now, to be the right kind of person, you need to make the right kind of choices. People think that they will automatically become the right kind of person and just passively make decisions that affect who they are or who they become. People don't realize that the decisions that they make today will affect who they become tomorrow. The decisions that you make today will affect who you are tomorrow. But people, they just think, oh, they'll just automatically, one day, it's a phase, it's a stage, they'll just be good. When I hear that, well, it's just a stage with kids, well, they're still in that stage. Immaturity is a stage with kids. Yeah, now they're 20 and 30, and they're just as immature as if they're 10. It's not a stage, it's a choice. But we think that it's just stages in life, and eventually they get to this stage where they become a good person. You just wait it out. It's not what it is. To be the right kind of person, you need to make the right kind of choices. You are the product of your own decisions. You are the sum or the culmination of all your choices. Your life is your fault. How it ends is your fault. Who you become is your fault. Who you are today is your fault. We live in a society where people don't like to take responsibility for themselves. They like to pass the blame. If someone's life is messed up, well, it's someone else's fault. Mom and dad's fault. It's society's fault. Well, I can't hold down the job, so it must be the economy's fault. It must be management's fault. They get into trouble at work or at schools, it's somebody else's fault. If they get caught committing a crime, it's the circumstance's fault. It's their childhood's fault. It's their influence's fault. It's everyone and everything's fault except their own. We live in a society where people shift the blame for their behavior, a society where people will not place the blame where it belongs, on themselves. The lack of personal responsibility has paved the way for excusing away sin and crime, nullifying the sinful tendencies of our hearts. Oh, I don't have a sinful heart. It's not my fault. It's circumstances, or it's this person, it's that person, it's the media, it's Hollywood, or it's our president, or it's our Congress, or it's our Senate, or it's our representative. It's their fault. It's not their fault. How your life ends is your fault. You are the product of your own decisions. You know, it grates me every time I hear of a serious crime that is committed, people simply say, like, the criminal, oh, he's such a good person, he has such a good heart, such a loving person. No, I can't believe this has happened. Now, sometimes I can believe that. You know, we can put on a front. People can put on a front. But they begin to excuse away the sinfulness of their crime. They begin to excuse away the sinfulness of their hearts. Oh, it's not their fault. Go easy on them, Judge. Let's have a plea deal. You know, after all, it's not your fault. This and this. This was going on, that was going on. And, you know, you just brought to your boiling point. It's not your fault. They begin to point fingers at this or that to explain away the fact that the criminal is actually at fault. It even grates me even more when it comes to gun violence. Not just because I'm all for the Second Amendment, but I remember a story. It just, what happened is you had this criminal. He has a record for being a criminal, robbery, armed robbery, violence. He had a record. He illegally had a gun. He wasn't allowed to, according to law, he wasn't supposed to have a gun, but he had one anyways. So he decides to rob a convenience store. The clerk had a gun too and shot and killed him. The criminal's sister says the clerk was wrong for having a gun at work, that he should not have defended himself, that he should not have the right to defend himself. She was mad that her brother was done. She began pointing fingers and said, it's the clerk's fault that he's dead. It's the gun's fault that he's dead. No, it's not the gun's fault, it's the person's fault. Every crime that deals with gun, oh, it's the gun's fault. It's the gun's fault. Get rid of the guns, get rid of crime. It's the gun's fault. No, it's not the gun's fault. It's the person's fault. Over in England, they have legislation concerning knives. What kind of knives you're allowed to have. What kind of knives you're allowed to buy. You can't just go buy yourself a butcher knife anymore. Because they have such tight gun control, there's hardly any guns. So you know what people turn to? Knives. Pretty soon, you get rid of them. Oh, let's use pitchforks. They can't outlaw that. People will find a way to commit crime. They'll find a way to kill. They'll find a way to cause harm. But people, we live in a society, they push it onto the object. It's the gun's fault. Or they push it on the people. It's the police officer's fault my kid is out of control. It's the police officer's fault my kid is dead. It's the police officer's fault my kid didn't listen to him. They begin to push everything off. Rather than looking and says, it's my son's fault, it's my child's fault, it's my fault. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. What you do is your fault. It's your choice. It's your decision. Now, you can raise your kids the best of your ability, but they're still their own individual person. We are not the product of a government. We are the product of our own choices. And my wife and I do everything we can to teach and train our kids to make the best decisions in life, but the decision is ultimately theirs. We do what we can to keep them on the straight and narrow path, if you will. But the decision will ultimately be theirs. When there's sin in our life, when our fellowship with God is broken, it's nobody's fault except our own. How often does God stand on the outside of our life looking in, wondering what he did wrong for us to treat him the way that we do? God wants to forgive. He's ready to do so, but we must first take responsibility for our actions. Who you are now is a result of the decisions you've made in the past. It's your life, and it's your fault. Who you have become and how you have changed are nothing more than the results, the product of your past choices. It's your fault. Who you are is your fault. Who you are, who you become, is just a matter of choices that you make in life. That you make. The government can't make choices for you. They can make it harder to make the right choice, granted, but they ain't making the choice for you. You have to make the choice. The only reason why people become alcoholics or drug addicts is because they choose to. They made the choice to start. Addicts are addicts because they chose to become addicts. They knew what they were doing, but they made the choice anyway. They knew the rest, and they made the choice anyways. In their right mind, they made the choice to become an addict. It's not because of family history. It's not because someone forced them to do it. It's not because of some genetic makeup. It's because they made the willful choice to do those things that become the people that they have become today. Josiah's family history consisted of murder, idolatry, rebellion, witchcraft, Satan worship, human sacrifice. Yet Josiah was the greatest king to rule over Israel. How can that be? He had a lot of skeletons hanging in his tree, his family tree, his family past. According to what this world says, Josiah should have been no different than his father Ammon or his grandfather Manasseh. A man whose history was filled with wickedness and evil, but yet he sought after God even more than David did. What made the difference? Josiah made the choice not to be like his father. He made the choice to not be like how his grandfather used to be. Even at 8 years old, Josiah made the choice. Josiah could have used every excuse in the book why he should become like his family. You know, what better excuse than I'm only a kid? What better excuse? I'm only 8. I'm only a child. You know how many people use excuses like that to justify what they know what they're doing is wrong? Or I'm a girl, or I'm a guy, I'm a teenager, I'm just a kid. I'm just a young adult. Therefore, it justifies my stupid behavior. It doesn't. As if that's to blame for the decisions that we make. We cannot show responsibility for ourselves onto someone or something else. When we stand before God, God is going to look at us and only us. And we have to be accountable for the decisions that we make. God's not going to look at our circumstances. He's not going to look at our history. He's not going to look at the pressures of life. He's not going to look at anything else, but he's going to look at us. And there'd be no reason. Granted, all these other things, they don't make it easy to make the right choices. They make it hard. But again, the choice is ours. We choose. We cannot control our family's history, or even how they are now, but we can control us. We control who we are. We can control who we become. There are some things you just have to say enough is enough. Thus and so might be part of my family's history, but it's not going to be part of mine. We can't change our family, but we can change us. Whatever the sin may be, you'd have to make the choice to draw the line and say enough is enough. And this is what Josiah did. By making the determination in your heart that you will not follow down the same path. Commit the same things. You choose who you become. It's your life. It's your fault. And when your life becomes a mess, you have no one to blame except for yourself. So one thing that David actually learned the hard way, we see this in Psalm 51. It's the psalm that David wrote after being confronted by Nathan the prophet, by God, concerning his sin with Bathsheba and with Uriah. And David knew, yeah, his life is now a mess. It's going to be a mess for the rest of his life. He had no one to blame except himself. And how often do you let sin set up a barrier between you and God, and that relationship that was once there just isn't there anymore? Your sin will keep you from the fellowship with God. The Lord's hand is not shortened that he cannot save. His ear is not heavy that he cannot hear, but our sin separates us from God. Our sin builds the wall, and every brick is a choice. Every brick we build or every brick we tear down, they're choices. And where you build a wall is a choice as well. You can build a wall between you and God, or you can build a wall between you and this world. This world is not going to affect me. This world, I'm not going to let this world influence me. You begin to build a wall, or you remove the wall between you and God. Every brick you lay down, every brick you tear down, is a single choice. Now, we don't live in an ideal world where everyone will acknowledge their sin before God. But we live in a world where people are not willing to take the responsibility for their own decisions, their own actions. People will find ways to blame others for their poor conditions that they put themselves in. People will blame their childhood, their circumstances, their influences, their job, their relations, the government, the president, the Senate, the mayor, their neighbor. Quit making excuses. None of these things or these people force us to become the people we are today. People have this idea that they are not the problem, but everyone else and everything else is. Psalm 51 is David acknowledges his sin before God. And when Nathan came and confronted David, it had been over a year. The child was already born. David messed up big time and he knew it. David most likely, maybe he thought that God even forgot about it. It's been over a year, the child's born. David probably thought he had done well in covering up his affair with Bathsheba. No one was the wiser about the whole thing, and yet David's sin was still found out. Just because God doesn't deal with your sin immediately doesn't mean he's forgotten about it. Just because God may not confront you about something immediately doesn't mean you got away with it. Time does not take your sin away, it just buries it. And although what David had done was done in secret, God is now going to punish him publicly for it. God convicted David's heart, and David took the responsibility for his own sin. He even accepted the consequences. You know how many people will not accept the consequences for their choices? The results of their choices, they won't accept them. And the reason why is because they will not take responsibility. They commit a sin, but they don't want people to judge them for it. They don't want the consequences. The sin's out there now. Might as well confess. And might as well, okay, it's out there. Everybody knows anyway, so it's not a big deal. But they don't want the consequences. They don't want people to judge them. They don't want to lose their friends. They don't want this to happen. They don't want that to happen. It's not a repentant heart. It's not a heart that is sorry for its sin. A heart that is repentant doesn't care what comes because it knows they deserve it. And they cast themselves at the mercy of God when it comes to the consequences. You're always trying to put the blame onto other people, always trying to excuse away your sin, or trying to convince God that you are right for doing wrong. You're not going to go anywhere in life. You'll be miserable, lost, without direction, wondering why God won't speak to you. But those who confess their sin, they find mercy. They realize that what they had done wrong was wrong, and that they are responsible for what they had done. And these are the people that are able to move on, if you will. Put the past in the past and just move on by the grace of God. Had David not taken responsibility for his sin, I don't think David would have been as successful as he was after the affair, after the confrontation. If David decided, to blame Bathsheba, it was her fault. She shouldn't have been out on that roof taking a bath, or actually she probably would have been in the middle of the street where they took baths. They didn't have private bathrooms. He could have blamed his circumstance. He could have blamed this. He could have blamed that, but he didn't. When you make a bad decision and when you find yourself down a path that you were never supposed to go down, there's no one to blame except yourself. You cannot blame your peers. You cannot blame your circumstances. You cannot blame your childhood. You cannot blame God. You cannot blame your coworkers. You cannot blame your friends. The only person you can blame is yourself. When you find yourself in a bad spot because of the choices you made, it's your fault. The only person, and as long as you're putting the blame on other people, onto your circumstances, or onto God, God can't help you. There's no way He can. There are no excuses with God. David knew that he couldn't blame other people for how his life turned out, and neither can you. You know why his life ended with violence in his family? It was because of him. You know why David's own son rose up? It was because of him. And even when he was suffering at the end of his life, the consequences of his sin, he still accepted it. You know what? I know why this is here. He still accepted it. You know, people can persuade you, they can coerce you, they can threaten you, but the choice is still up to you. What choices you make is your choice. As long as you're putting the blame for your poor decisions onto other people, you'll go nowhere in life. We need to take responsibility for how our life turns out. We need to take responsibility for the decisions that we make. Understand, it's our life. It's our fault. Who we are today is the culmination of the decisions we made in the past, and who we are in the future will be the culmination of the decisions that we make today. You know, rarely is your life ever ruined by one big decision. I venture to say never is your life ruined by one big decision, but rather it's done by a series of little decisions. Done by a series of little decisions. It may be one decision that becomes a turning point in your life, but that one big decision is supported by so many other little decisions that led you there. So many crossroads and paths that we can take in life, so many decisions that we make just every day. That we would like to say, there's this one big decision. Well, that one big decision is actually a bunch of little decisions, all culminated into one. So you can say it was a one big decision, or you can say it was actually a bunch of little ones. Because if any of those little ones were different, that one big decision may not have even existed. Who you are now, who you are, or where you're at in life, again, is a culmination of everyday decisions, the little ones. You know, in the garden, who did Adam blame for him eating the fruit? His wife. Well, she gave it to me. Why not? She gave it to me. And God looks at Eve. Says, Eve, did you eat? She says, yeah, I ate, but the serpent tricked me. It's his fault. And he turns to the serpent, and the serpent had no one to blame. But he wasn't sorry with what he did. He ruined man's relationship with God, and he was happy about it. But blame shifting, not taking responsibility. And the interesting thing is that Adam and Eve, they both did admit to eating the fruit. God says, did you eat the fruit? I told you not to eat. Adam says, yes, I did, but the woman gave it to me. Sure, he took a little responsibility, but he wasn't taking all. He ain't going down without his partner in crime. He ain't going down alone. It's her fault. Yes, I did it, but it's her fault. Is ultimately what he's saying. Same with Eve. Yeah, God, I did it, but it was the serpent's fault. He's the reason why I ate. He tricked me. He lied to me. You know, God didn't care about Adam and Eve's excuses. God held Adam responsible for his decision. Then he looked at Eve, and he held Eve responsible for her decision. God held them individually responsible for their actions and gave each one a punishment fit for the crime. Adam will now have to work for the rest of his life to eat. Eve will now suffer pain in childbearing. Before the fall, there was no pain, or there never would have been pain in childbearing. But now there is. Punishment fit for the crime. Even so, God won't care about what excuses you can come up with or who you can blame. God's going to hold you personally responsible for the decisions that you make. God will hold you responsible for what courses of action that you take in life. People will mislead you. The serpent misled Eve. He lied, or there was a lot of truth to what he said. But how he said it produced a lie in Eve's mind. You become as God, knowing good and evil. Well, that was true. It's 100% true. God verifies that. That's why he kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden, because they came like God in knowing good and evil. But it's the way Satan presented the truth that it formed a lie. Got her to think something else. It was deception. She was misled. But she still knew it was wrong. Didn't matter what the serpent said, didn't matter how persuasive he was, she still knew it was wrong, and she ate it anyways. Or she took a bite, however you want to look at it. Then she gave it to Adam. Adam was not deceived. He did. But his decision was, does he stay in the garden with God, or does he now suffer the consequence with his wife? Who is he now going to exalt? But it was still his choice. He could have turned the offer down and says, no, Eve, you're my wife, but sorry, God's more important. I cannot. He could have, but he didn't. People will mislead you. People will make it hard to do right. But when you do wrong, you have to take full responsibility without trying to drag the other person down. See, when you drag the other person down, you're saying it's not my fault. I have an excuse, and he's right here. He's my excuse. But when you don't, and that may be true, you may have a partner in crime. But when you don't, what you're saying is, there is no excuse. It doesn't matter what my partner in crime said. It doesn't matter what influences I had. It doesn't matter what I was told. There's no excuse. No excuse for my behavior, no excuse for my actions, no excuse for my decisions. When you take full responsibility, what you're saying is that there is no excuse. And honestly, there is no excuse. Human nature will tempt you to bring someone else down with you. Don't go down alone. But don't shift the blame. It's your life. It turns out how you choose it turns out. In a sense, there is a sliver of truth to that you are the master of your own destiny. Most of it's a lie, but there is a truth to that. Who you become is your choice. And I think that's the whole point of being a master of your own destiny, is that who you become is your choice. It's decisions that you make. It has nothing to do with your upbringing. It may be hard to make the right choice. You may not have the best and the godliest influences in your life. Make it even that much more difficult to make the right choice. But you know the right choice, and you can still make it. As long as you're pointing your finger at this person or that person, this circumstance or that circumstance, God can't do anything. He cannot do anything with your life. Blame shifting is just another way of saying that you've done nothing wrong. It's not your fault. So we have a king, Josiah. 8 years old, he takes the throne. He becomes known as a king who sought after God even more so than David, his father. There was no king like him before, and there was no king like him after, who sought God with all of his heart. But you look at his father. Look at his grandfather. And he knew his grandfather. He knew his, obviously he knew his father. But not the greatest circumstances, not the greatest influences, but look how he turned out. Why? Because it's his life. He didn't have to make the same choices his father did. He didn't have to make the same choices his grandfather did. It's his life. He is his own individual. And we lose this. We forget about this. Kids, David, my son David, he's his own individual. Same with Daniel and Christine and Catherine. They are their own individual. I do my best to raise them right, to make the right decision, but they are their own individual. They are not me. They are not my wife. They're like a hodgepodge of both of us. But even still, it's their life, it's their decision, how they turn out. When they get older, when they leave the home and they're on their own, how they turn out, that is their decision. Even in the home, how they turn out, whether they turn out obedient or whether they turn out rebellious, that is their decision. I'll do my best to teach them, to train them, but ultimately it's up to them. It's the student's choice whether he wants to learn or not the teacher. It's our lives. We are our own individuals. It's called the freedom of conscience. And we all have it. We have the freedom to make the choices that we want. Do you find yourself shifting the blame for your choices? For the bad choices? Sure, all the good choices, sure, we take credit for that, not a problem. But the bad choices, do you find yourself shifting the blame? You're blaming your circumstances, blaming your child, blaming this. Now, granted, it does affect us, but ultimately, it is our choice. Our childhood does have an effect on us. Circumstances will have an influence over us, but ultimately it is our choice who we become, who we are. Do you find yourself justifying your sin with one excuse or another? See, a lot of people who look at their childhood, they're just shifting blame. What they're saying is, it's not my fault. My decisions are not my fault. Your decisions are your fault. Decisions I make, my fault. Take responsibility for your own life. He that covers sin will not prosper, but he that confesses and forsakes his sin will find mercy. The greatest thing that you can ever do is humble yourself before God. Acknowledge that there's no excuse. There's no one to blame but yourself. It's your life. The choices that you make are your fault. There's no one to blame but ourselves. Who we are, who we have become, who we will become. Just a culmination of everyday choices that we make. And living in a wicked society, a society that's increasingly becoming more and more anti-Christ, it will be harder. The more wicked the influences, it will be more difficult to make the right choices. But we have the grace of God. We have the wisdom of God. We have the Word of God. We can make the right choice. But are we going to make the choice to make the right choice? It's all our choice. It's all of our choice. Take responsibility for your life. You're the product of your own decisions. If you don't like where you're at now, change. Make the choice. You're tired of the world having influence on you, build a wall between you and the world. Don't let the world build a wall between you and God. Every brick you lay down is a choice. Or every brick you tear down is a choice. Your life is your fault. But we need the grace of God to do it in our lives.